Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. After a couple of years, I finally decided that the MMU2 just isn't really worth the hassle of maintaining it as part of my otherwise very good Prusa i3 Mark III printer. Really do like the printer, and I really haven't liked or used the MMU2 too much, and I thought I'd just go over why that is and let you know what I thought of it in case you're considering getting it. That way you can at least take my opinion into account on it. If you enjoy the videos, please subscribe down below and give us a thumbs up. Thanks. Hi, welcome back to the Workbench. Today I'm removing the Prusa i3 Mark III MMU2 unit. It's been on here for 2 years and I've started to have problems, extra problems with it. Overall, I'm not terribly happy with the design, and I don't think it was actually worth using in the first place. My opinion, and this is specifically for my use cases, so it doesn't apply to everyone or every case of it, but here's what I thought about it and you know, how it's been while I've been using it. So let me show you what it's doing right now and why I'm taking it off currently, why I finally decided to get rid of it from the assembly. First thing I'd like to say is the Prusa i3 Mark III printer has been remarkably reliable, with the exception of the heat bed, which I did a little video on removing the connector and resoldering, and they've since updated that whole scheme so that it's a little more reliable in the current release. And I didn't update mine yet, but the current connectors are a little better. The cabling's a little smoother. They did improve it since this was released. This is one of the original models. And when I ordered it, I also ordered in the MMU2 with it, expecting to get the original model with the multiple motors attached, where it had the multiple motors and then a Bowden setup going over to here, and this was just a hot end with no motor attached on it. That was actually what I wanted, and I wanted it to play around with some different things. So one of the reasons why I wasn't too happy with it is because it wasn't actually what I ordered in the first place. I don't think I would have ordered this model. It's not something I really needed to use or wanted to play around with. Unfortunately, it doesn't really handle anything except for multiple types of the same type of material loaded in for multicolor arrangements. It's not really easy or possible to, as far as I'm aware, and as far as I've used it, it didn't seem to be like it would be a great fit for doing anything other than specifically this. The other problem I've run into is the Bowden tubes themselves that go over to the PTFE tubing anyway, that goes over to the filament rolls and mates up with the MMU2. Unfortunately, that tends to cause the filament to break if it's PLA. It'll stiffen in the tube and just snap and cause clogs, jams. It just causes problems. So if you're using PLA, you have to actually unload the filament, which makes this whole setup kind of a pain to use. If I was using 3 different PLAs, I'd have to load them up every time anyway. I suppose I could probably use some dryer box setup or a more complex setup that didn't run the tubing like this, so it kept the PLA in a more natural form when it's feeding in. That would probably work okay. PETG, coincidentally, doesn't have that problem. PETG would work fine. Still, I do like to leave the filament in a dry box rather than leaving it out, so this setup isn't great for any of the things I like to do. And I also don't take advantage of multicolor printing. That's not why I ordered the MMU2 in the first place. So for me, it wasn't a good fit, and I just haven't made any extra use of it. And it's periodically failed. It's just very titchy to use. The automatic mechanisms that, you know, home it, I've recorded a couple of videos on stuff with it where it didn't actually work properly. It just goes and doesn't go to the end and then slams into the other side and just ratchets against it. And eventually something's failed on it where it no longer works. Let's take a look at that now. So during the startup, this is what it normally does. And it's not having any issues that I can see here. Well, I'm not sure if this normally stops there. It starts up once, ratchets, and then once the ROM is done loading on the Prusa itself, it should ratchet once again. There it goes. And it's stopping on the second light again. I don't recall if that's normal or not. I have to go back and see if I have a video of it working normally. But then if you try to change the position, which should cause it to home and then go all the way back, that's what I'm getting. It's just failing. It could be wiring. This could be some kind of internal problem. Could be one of the mechanisms is jammed or not responding or whatever. I have no idea, but that's kind of it for me with this. I decided I've had enough of using it. This would actually happen periodically at the end of a print, or if I was trying to cycle between prints. I wasn't sure on exactly what the conditions were, but something I was doing normally seemed to cause this problem to occur on a somewhat regular basis. I don't really feel like troubleshooting it and going through the hassle of figuring out what's going on here. So that's why the MMU2 is coming off on here. I've just had enough of trying to use it. The Bowden tube problems create a big issue using PLA, which is probably what I'd use for multicolor prints since it's kind of more forgiving on the printing. PETG tends to string up a lot. It also tends to stay in the nozzle quite a bit, so even if it's purged, if I'm using black PETG, I've noticed that it tends to stay in there for quite a while. It tends to gum up on the tip. You always, at least I always, tend to get some garbage on it, even with the silicone sock on there. So this just hasn't been a very useful configuration for me. Might be different for you. If I was going for a multi-extruder setup, I'd probably go with the Core XY with the multi-tool tips that acts like a CNC mill or something to that effect, where it just picks up the extruder, goes with the next one. You can program the extruders for different things. I don't know how robust the programming is in the different firmwares yet, but I would imagine that's just going to get better over time. And I would assume that when it's working as intended, you'll be able to program each head individually during the job, much like a CNC mill where, speeds and feeds would be different for different heads and need to be for whatever you're doing. If you can do that, then you could use multiple materials. You could, say, extrude a TPU over a housing so that you'd have a grippy part of the housing, or you could overmold different plastics. Well, it wouldn't be molding in this case, but you could simulate overmolding different plastics, and that's kind of the things I wanted to experiment with this. This just hasn't been any use for that, essentially, because it's just not anything it's designed for. So I was a little disappointed when I got it in finally after all that, and it wasn't what I actually had ordered. So would I order it again? I don't think so. It doesn't really do anything I need it to. It didn't really fit the original design, and it's been something of a letdown with things like this happening on it periodically, just not as robust as I need it to be. It might be a good value if it does exactly what you need it to do. The price isn't horrible for it, and it seemed to function okay for a couple years had I been using it for specifically changing between the colors, with the two caveats I had there with the Bowden tubes and possibly some jamming and whatnot on the extrusion end. The other area it tends to be a little titchy is in the hot end. When it extrudes out and the extrusion gets pulled back up from there, sometimes you'll get a ball left on the end of the extrusion, on the end of the rest of the plastic remaining anyway. And when that gets pulled through, that just messes up the MMU2. It'll jam up in the extruder up there, or up in the motor drive unit on the MMU2. Then you get problems with it not working. I think originally they intended the cutter to take care of that, so it would cut each time. What they found out is that the cut end, when it's cut flat, doesn't go through here very well either. So they just kind of got rid of that, but they didn't replace it with anything. It just no longer does that, and now you just end up getting the large globs on the end of the filament, which screw it up for continuous prints, and never really got acknowledged in the design that that's a problem. So I don't know what's up there. They do say that, oh, you have to align it correctly, and you have to have it pull out just right, and the timing has to be great, and the temperatures have to be spot on, and I don't think any of that's the case. I think that's more just trying to excuse a poorly designed feature by blaming the user for the machine not being, an exact machine. This is a hobbyist unit. I don't expect it to be very incredibly precise. I expect it to be very good for the price, which it is. But when you add the MMU2, you would need it to be very precise for some of the features the way they're implemented, and it's just not. So that's kind of disappointing for me on there too. So those are the two major things that I've had going on with this with usage. So those are something to consider if you're going to be buying it and you want to use it for particular things. If those two features would kind of be a deal breaker, then you may want to consider something else, a different type of multiple extruder that wouldn't have those drawbacks in it. So that's it. The MMU2 is going away. I was kind of disappointed by it, but those are my thoughts on it. Just my personal opinion, so take it for what it's worth. I'm not counting that as a massive technical assessment of it or any kind of teardown of the parts and indictment of the quality. It is what it is, and you should really take that into account when you're thinking of using it or considering other solutions against it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.